Okay, so our host family, you're familiar with Uddhava Gita? A little bit? Should I give a little background? Background is good, right? Okay. Towards the end, almost at the very end of Krishna's pastimes on earth, Uddhava Gita is spoken. It's like Bhagavad-Gita, not in the sequence of the topics, but like fundamental teachings, as Krishna gives to Arjuna, Krishna gives to Uddhava. As Arjuna is Krishna's cousin, Uddhava is Krishna's cousin. Krishna and Arjuna are cousins because their father, Arjuna's mother, and Krishna's father are brother and sister. Right? Vasudeva and Kunti are brother and sister. But Vasudeva also had a brother. He had several brothers. One of them was Krishna. Devabhaga. And Devabhaga's son was Uddhava, so they're cousins. And they're dear friends. As Arjuna was dear friend of Krishna, Uddhava was even more dear friend of Krishna. He was constantly with Krishna from the time Krishna went to Mathura to the time Krishna departed. He was always with Krishna, wherever Krishna was. And going back, this is, Uddhava Gita starts with chapter 7 of Canto 11. Canto 7. Chapter 7 of Canto 11. Although it takes place during the period of time that Krishna was in Dwarka. So in chapter 6, a few events happen leading up to Uddhava Gita. The first event that's spoken of in chapter 6 is the Brahmanas curse the members of the Yadu dynasty to die. The curse came because Samba, along with some other boys, were spoofing on the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas had just completed a yagya in Dwarka at the place of Vasudev's arrangement, and then they retired to another place, a sacred place not so far from Dwarka, to gather together and associate from the Brahmanas' Sangha. And while they were together, Samba, one of Krishna's children, dressed in a sari, and his little friends, they came before the Brahmanas, and Samba was looking down, and they wanted to know, he said, this very shy lady, she wants to know whether the child, because there was a lump of iron underneath her sari, or his sari, whether it'll be a boy or a girl. And the Brahmanas knew exactly they were being spoofed. And they said, that entity under the sari of this lady will be the destruction of the Yadu dynasty for your offense to the Brahmanas. Whoa. So the boys went and told Ugrasena. Ugrasena consulted his ministers. The decision was made, take that lump of iron, grind it into powder, and throw it into the sea. The instruction was followed. They ground it into powder and threw it into the sea, except for one piece wouldn't grind. And that one piece was also thrown into the sea. That one piece was swallowed by a fish. The fish was caught by a fisherman. A hunter bought the fish. When he opened up the fish, he found this piece of iron. With that iron, he used the iron to make the tip of an arrow, which shot Krishna in the heel. Krishna's arrangement for his departure, because you don't get killed by an arrow wound in your heel. But that was Krishna's arrangement. And the rest of the lump of iron washed to the shore in Prabhas, and then So the Yadu dynasty members were cursed by the Brahmanas. Ugrasena hit the decision that he made. Krishna's alone, and the demigods descend and offer prayers and say, you fulfilled your promise. You protected us. You killed the demons. If you wish, you may return to your transcendental abode. And they left. It's still chapter 6 of Canto 11. And then the concluding part of chapter 6, Canto 11, Krishna's alone. Krishna's contemplating that the stage is set for the Yadu dynasty to return back to the spiritual realm. Those who are devas go back to the deva realm. The stage is set. There's just one thing I want to do. I want to instruct Uddhava so that he can, two services. He can take, when I appeared in this world, one of the places I didn't go was Badrinath. I wanted to give association to the followers of Narayana Rishi. I didn't go there. I can give instructions to Uddhava. He can take the instructions. He's got some service. The second is he can travel around and give transcendental knowledge after I've departed. Krishna's just contemplating. And it ends, Uddhava shows up. That's the scene on the screen. And Uddhava knows Krishna's heart. He knows he's going to leave. He knows. So he falls at Krishna's feet, begs Krishna, take me with you. Don't leave me behind. And the second is, please help me to understand you perfectly, because there's an obstacle for my understanding you perfectly, and that obstacle is my undue attachment to material existence and family life and paraphernalia and stuff. So please give me the instructions by which I can become freed from that. Chapter 6 ends. Chapter 7 begins. Krishna answers. Uddhava says, tell me more. I'm still attached. So then Krishna, for 3 chapters, 7, 8, and 9, we're in chapter 10, as you see. 7, 8, and 9, Krishna speaks to Uddhava about a conversation between an Avadhuta Brahmin and King Yadu, their ancestor, because they're the Yadu dynasty, the Yadavas. So one time King Yadu was on tour in his kingdom. He saw this young Avadhuta Brahmin and then spoke to him and said, how did you become like this? You're young, you're attractive, you have everything going for you, but you're appearing like, you don't care for anything. How did that come about? Detachment is a valued quality. So the Avadhuta Brahmana speaks to King Yadu, saying, I learned about knowledge and detachment from 24 gurus. And 3 chapters is the 24 gurus. The 24 gurus are ranging from the elements, like the sky and the ocean and wind, and then entities like bumblebees and insects and birds, and then people like a young girl that had bangles and a prostitute, and it's 24 gurus. And from each of those gurus he learned something about the temporary nature of this world and the importance of being attached to the eternal. Knowledge and detachment. It's a whole knowledge of detachment session. Like again and again and again. And again and again and again. And again and again and again. because that was Uddhava's question. How do I become detached? Learn from those who are detached how to become detached. It's not that you have to become an Avaduta Brahman to become detached, but there's principles. And then chapter 10 begins, according to our acharyas. Krishna's going to, in this chapter, explain how to become like that. Not how to become an Avaduta, but how to come to that stage of consciousness where you can see things properly. And then you can act properly because you see things properly, because you're not attached. How is that possible? How is it done? And we're already, as you see, at verse 27. And the earlier verses, Krishna reiterated many of the things that we know from Bhagavad-Gita about the soul and the body are different. And then he goes on to say, Krishna goes on to say in 6 verses, this is part of them, Uddhava, don't make the mistake of performance of fruitive activities for the purpose of achieving heaven, because it also is temporary like the body is temporary. It's just another version of the temporary. Don't pursue the temporary. Detachment requires understanding that which is temporary, and you act responsibly and do the needful, recognizing it's temporary and it's connected to the source of everything, and then act in relation to the source of everything, even as you interact with the temporary. So don't make the mistake of aspiring for heavenly happiness. That's the section, 27 through 30. That's the background. There are 3 verses that are combined in their translation, 27, 28, 29. So I'm going to read translation. If a human being is engaged in sinful, irreligious activities, either because of bad association or because of his failure to control his senses, then such a person will certainly develop a personality full of material desires. He thus becomes miserly towards others, greedy and always anxious to exploit the bodies of women. When the mind is so polluted, one becomes violent and aggressive, and without the authority of Vedic injunctions, slaughters innocent animals for sense gratification. Worshipping ghosts and spirits, the bewildered person falls fully into the grip of unauthorized activities and thus goes to hell, where he receives a material body infected with the darkest modes of nature. In such a degraded body, he unfortunately continues to perform inauspicious activities that greatly increase his future unhappiness, and therefore he again accepts a similar material body. What possible happiness can there be for one who engages in activities inevitably terminating in death? So again, it's knowledge and detachment, knowledge of the temporariness of things that are temporary, and not indulging, because even unintentionally some mistakes will be made, and one is responsible for mistakes made. So the way that I have prepared this is Bhaktisiddhanta. You know who is Bhaktisiddhanta, right? Yes? So Bhaktisiddhanta very kindly has made his own commentary, his own translation, his own commentary, and he has summarized Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, previous Acharya's commentary. So those 3 things we're going to read along with the BBT commentary and Vishwanath's commentary. So we'll hear some of the same points again, which is fine because it makes, from different angles of vision, it makes the points clear. So here's Bhaktisiddhanta's translation of the Sanskrit. If a person engages in sinful activities, either due to bad association or his unwillingness to control his senses, he will certainly become mad due to having desires that are impossible to fulfill. Such a person hardly cares for others, is very greedy, and always seeking the opportunity to enjoy the bodies of women. When the mind is contaminated in this way, one does not hesitate to commit violence, and thus he slaughters poor animals for the satisfaction of the tongue, sometimes worshipping ghosts and spirits. Such a bewildered person is not better than an animal, and after death he goes to hell, which is a manifestation of the darkest mode of material nature. Receiving a hellish body, he continues to perform horrible activities that ensure his future misery. What happiness can there be for one who engages in activities that culminate in death? So whether it's pious or impious, this is the impious, and the pious, it also ends in death. So what thoughtful person will knowingly do things that just end in death? And things are taken. Just a little comment. In the 10th canto, when Narada Muni goes to pay a visit to Lord Shiva, because they're kind of like equals. Narada looks up to Lord Shiva, but they have a friendship. So he went to see his friend, Lord Shiva. And when he went to see his friend, he came across something that was, very unpleasant. He saw the two sons of Kuvera, who were at that time, Lord Shiva was inhabiting a portion of his celestial garden. And Nala Kuvera and Manigriva were totally intoxicated with liquor and were naked, enjoying in the sacred river with the damsels there. They were also naked. And Narada came before them, and the girls covered themselves. Nala Kuvera and Manigriva didn't, because they were intoxicated with pride as well. So then there's this Narada didn't take offense, although it was an offense. What he was considering is, how have these two become so degraded? And when one becomes so degraded, particularly degraded by pride, then one can do any violent thing, similar to here, any violent thing. And there's a whole discussion by Narada, a contemplation, including animal killing. And what's needed to remove the pride of these two is that which they're proud of, it's taken from them. Not like, I'm going to get them. It's just, he wanted their upliftment. Then the upliftment meant they're too intoxicated with the wealth of Kuvera, their position of being sons of Kuvera, who is very dear to Lord Shiva, and they're intoxicated externally. And it can go in any direction of including cruelty and violence to others. Specifically, he mentions animal killing, and think nothing of it. That's during Krishna's pastimes, or just before Krishna's pastimes, because they became trees in the courtyard of Nanda Maharaj. But that's the present situation. Without even thinking about it, no problem. And if you try to get somebody to think about it, it's hard to get them to think about it. I mean, some people can think about it and do a course correction. If you've ever tried, then you know what I'm talking about. It's like, so that's what's being spoken of by Krishna to Uddhava at this point also. Fruitive activities. lead to sinful fruitive activities, lead to becoming very dull and very violent and very lusty. Kamesha, Krodesha, like that. Okay, so here's the BBT purport. Before I read the BBT purport, there's some terms that are important to know that are mentioned in the purport. Pravriti and Nivriti. Marg. Marg means path. And within the Vedas, there's two. The path of progressive material enjoyment and the path of progressive material detachment. So this is a whole lesson in detachment. Nivriti is the path of detachment. You engage yourself with objects, but not for the purpose of trying to become the enjoyer of those objects, but, in a dutiful way, without attachment, and gradually minimize the involvement, in whatever reasonable ways. You go in that direction, as opposed to progressive material enjoyment, more material objects, heavenly pleasures, more, an upgrade in the qualities of those objects. And that's the pravriti marg. So it's mentioned here. Pravriti, nivriti. BBT purport. In the Vedic analysis of civilized life, there are two paths. One who takes to the path of nivriti marg immediately renounces material sense gratification and purifies existence by performance of austerity and devotional activities. On the path of pravriti marg, one furnishes a steady supply of sense objects to the senses, but one consumes such sense objects under strict regulations and through ritualistic ceremonies, thus gradually purifying the heart and satiating the material senses. Unfortunately, as explained in this and the previous verse, the path of pravriti marg is extremely volatile because, rather than becoming detached, the living entity often becomes uncontrolled and fully addicted to further sense gratification. In the previous verse, the path of regulated, authorized sense gratification was described. That's the heavenly attainment. And in this verse, the path of unauthorized, demoniac sense gratification is described. Paragraph. In this verse, the words Sangad, Asatam, Vajitendriyaha are very significant. One may fall down into sinful life by bad association. Sangam asata, asat sangha, bad association. Or, even in good association, one may fail to control his senses. Vajitendriyaha. Ultimately, each living entity is responsible for his existential situation. The word adharmarataha in this verse indicates those engaged in excessive sex life, meat eating, drinking, and other inauspicious activities that transgress the codes of civilized human life. Being in the mode of ignorance, these persons develop such a cruel mentality that they do not consider any festive occasion complete without the consumption of large quantities of meat obtained by slaughtering helpless animals. Eventually, such persons become influenced by ghosts and spirits who deprive them of all ability to discriminate between right and wrong. Losing all sense of decency, they become fit candidates for entrance into the darkest modes of material existence. Sometimes these lusty, intoxicated carnivores, considering themselves pious, pray to God in a useless way. Afflicted by innumerable material desires, they rotate from one material body to another without experiencing true happiness. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has noted, and we're going to read his commentary shortly, that material life is so disturbing that even if one is allowed to live for an entire day of Brahma, approximately 8 billion, this is a day of Brahma. This is 8 million, not a life of Brahma. The day of Brahma is 8,640,000,000 years. So our solar years. 8,670,000,000,000,000 of our solar years. That's one day of Brahma. If one can live that long, one will eventually be afflicted by the fear of death. In fact, Brahma himself is disturbed by fear of death. So, what to speak of tiny human beings who live a paltry 70 or 80 years at most. Thus, as stated here, Kim Sukham Marcha Dharminaha. What possible happiness can one find within the painful grip of material illusion? And here is Bhaktisiddhanta's purport. Impious people engage in irreligious activities. Becoming addicted to sinful activities, they are intemperate. I mean, it's the opposite of temperate. They're not mild. They're extreme. Intemperate. Lusty, miserly, greedy, henpecked, and violent, either due to the association of other sinful people or due to being unable to control their senses. Paragraph. Such impious persons indulge in unrestricted sexual enjoyment, slaughter countless animals for the satisfaction of their tongues, and try to forget their miseries by means of intoxication. In this way, they transgress all prescribed rules and regulations. Eventually, such persons become influenced by ghosts and spirits who deprive them of all ability to discriminate between right and wrong. Losing all sense of decency, they become fit candidates for entrance into the darkest modes of material existence. Paragraph. Those who are ignorant of the glories of devotional service engage in fruitive activities with a desire to enjoy the flickering pleasures of sense gratification. That's the previous set of verses, the Heavenly Planet program. As a result, when their duration of life comes to an end, they are transferred to another body to enjoy or suffer the result of their past fruitive activities. Considering all this, one should never aspire for material happiness. Material life is so horrible because no matter what one's duration of life might be, one will still always be afflicted with fear of death. Even Brahma is afraid of death, so what to speak of us, who live for no more than 100 years. Considering this, what possible happiness can there be for the conditioned souls? That's not a favorable forecast. There is an alternative, but what Uddhava was asking, the question, he's getting an answer to his question. I recognize an obstacle for me to know you clearly and fully is my attachment to the temporary. Please help me become freed from the detachment to the temporary so that I can know you without obstruction, without obstacle. So he's not just getting pushed around, he's getting what he asked for. How to become properly detached so that my attachment to you is unobstructed. Now here's Bhaktisiddhanta's gloss of Vishwanath's commentary and then his commentary. There are two classes of those who perform karma, pious and impious. Paragraph. After describing the destination of pious persons, there's like 5-6 verses, the hellish attainment, the destination of impious persons is now being described. One who is not self-controlled is certainly lusty, and such a person afflicted by lust becomes very miserly. Such a greedy person who is overwhelmed by the thirst for material enjoyment becomes henpecked due to being addicted to enjoying sex with women. He performs animal sacrifices that are opposed to the principles of religion to fulfill his insatiable desires. The phrase, Ulbanamataha refers to the non-moving living entities, such as trees. Such persons who are engaged in fruitive activities never achieve tangible happiness. This is the conclusion of these verses. So there's, in introducing, the Vedic concept to new people, like particularly new Western people, it's a standard entry point. It's one of the many very basic entry points is what's real happiness. This is a graduate study of what's real happiness. But people want to be happy, and they're not always experiencing happiness. Without fail, who is always experiencing happiness? There's the unwanted part. And is that happiness what real happiness is? The flickering senses, sense-object program. Is that what real happiness is? Or is it a lure to engage one in the temporary that brings not real happiness and misery? When it's the sensation of senses and sense-object isn't nice. Here's Vishnu's commentary. There are two types of people qualified for action: the religious and the sinful. The destination of the religious has been described. The destination of the sinful is now described. The word va indicates that some people by their nature cannot control their senses. Because they're full of desires, they become miserable and then overcome by thirst for enjoyment. They indulge in women and for that purpose commit violence to other beings. They kill animals against the rules. It is said, this is from Shrota Sutra, one should worship by offering sacrificed victims to inflict injury on others. Apparently this is a portion of the Vedas that deals with, getting back. Anyway, how to harm your enemy. There's like what Shringi did, that mantra that would bring a snake bird that would kill Maharaj Parikshit. That's from that section of the Vedas. There's everything. The Vedas is a desire tree, including stuff like this. So anyway, they end up in the worst darkness as plants. Verse 29 summarizes, there is no happiness in performing karmas. So that's verse 29, 27, 28, 29. Here's one devotee, a teenager in Houston. Maybe by now she's in her early 20s. But in any case, she did some illustrations. So, what's going on the right side, what's going on the left side are contrasting pictures. The left side is the course of destruction. If you look closely, it's all kinds of fires and, horrible scenes, people falling from windows, and there's helicopters jet planes up above. Down below, there's a helicopter dropping stuff on people. Then there's, in the middle, that's two pilgrims with their backpacks searching for something. In the middle, I like this painting. I don't know where she gets this artwork. But in the middle, that's like, primitive artwork in geological excavations or something like that. And over on the right, there's kind of, very mode of goodness-y type of scene, agriculture, people on that patio thing over there, they're gathering together, having a meal together, it looks like, at a table. There's some water down there, and there's a little bridge over the water down there. It's just like a very nice scene, kind of like a mode of goodness-y type of scene. And then the other mode over on the left. And there's two people standing on that walkway down, going in that direction is one lady. She looks like she's attracted to what's down there. Over on the left side, there's another lady looking at what's going on over there. So, not a difficult choice. Here's the text that she took this illustration to depict. In the Vedic analysis of civilized life, there are two paths. One who takes to the path of Nivritti Marg immediately renounces material sense gratification and purifies his existence by performance of austerity and devotional activities. On the path of Pravriti Marg, one furnishes a steady supply of sense objects to the senses, but one consumes such objects under strict regulations and through ritualistic ceremonies, thus gradually purifying the heart and satiating the material desires. Unfortunately, as explained in this and the previous verse, the path of Pravriti Marg is extremely volatile because rather than becoming detached, the living entity often becomes uncontrolled and fully addicted to further sense gratification. And this is about, because the question was raised, how to become detached. Though going the path of enjoyment, regulated religious enjoyment, has its perils. Often one doesn't become detached, as is the intention, but one becomes uncontrolled. And that's a problem. Okay, so I'm going to read just a little bit from text 30, and tomorrow in the late morning session we'll complete it. Text 30. Text 30 is connected to these three, 27, 28, 29. The translation reads, "In all the planetary systems, from the heavenly to the hellish, and for all of the great demigods who live for 1,000 yugas, 1,000 yugas is a day of Brahma, there is fear of me in my form of time. Even Brahma, who possesses the supreme lifespan," and it's a big number. It's taking that number times 1,000 times 2. One day of Brahma, there's also a night of equal duration. And then you take 30 of those days and nights, and that's 1 month times 12 times 1,000. So it's a big number. 311 trillion, 40 billion years. That's the lifespan of Brahma. Is also afraid of me in the form of time. Bhakti Siddhanta's translation, "In all the planetary systems, from the heavenly planets down to the hellish planets, even the demigods who live for a kalpa, and even Brahma who lives for 2 prararthas," 2 prararthas is what that large number. So it's his life has 2 halves. You know, when he's 50, the bell rings, and when he's 100, the bell's over. That makes 2 prararthas. That's divisions of time. He's afraid of me in my form of time. The PBT purport, short. There are many statements throughout Vedic literature proving that even the great demigods fear the time potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even in the heavenly planets, there is no relief from the miseries of material life. No conditioned soul can live eternally, as clearly demonstrated by the deaths of Hiranyakashipu and other demons. Since even the demigods fear the time potency of the Personality of Godhead, one may easily conclude that Krishna is the absolute truth and that he is eternally the supreme controller of everything and everyone. Lord Krishna is the only real shelter. I mean, so when there's detachment for the temporary, what's really important is attachment to the eternal. Because if you don't have the sense of the eternal or the shelter of the eternal, then you become a nihilist or something, a voidist. And there's no shelter. So it's an impermanent and not very attractive situation. Okay. BBT purport reads, there are many statements throughout Vedic literature proving that even the great demigods fear the time potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even in the heavenly planets, there is no relief from the miseries of material life. No conditioned soul can live. I read this, didn't I? I read that. I'm sorry. I read it. Sorry. I'll just read two more. There's further, but we'll continue tomorrow. This is Bhaktisiddhanta glossing over Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary. One may imagine that the heavenly planets and the pleasure experienced there are eternal, but this is being refuted in this verse. Neither the heavenly planets nor its rulers are eternal. Even Brahma is afraid of the Supreme Lord. This is stated in the Vedas. And he quotes Taittiriya Upanishad. And this is quoted in Bhagavad-Gita. Purport. It is out of fear of the Supreme Brahman that the wind is blowing. Out of fear of him that the sun regularly rises and sets. Out of fear of him that the fire acts. And this fear is explained here. It's the time energy. The time energy is fearful because the time energy destroys. And those that don't want destruction, that want happiness that isn't just interrupted by misery or it lasts forever, there's a fear because it's going to, time energy will take it away. That's the fear idea. It is only due to fear of him that death and Indra, the king of heaven, perform their respective duties. This again is time energy moves everything. Paragraph. From this statement, the supreme authority of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is clearly established, and the belief that Brahma is the Supreme Person, Brahma is the Supreme Person, is refuted. Because some people think like that. I think I'm going to read one more. Yeah, it's different. This is Jiva Goswami, and just a little background, who is Jiva Goswami? Jiva Goswami is one of the principal followers of Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya established the chanting of the holy name, and he gave teachings to principal disciples, particularly Rupa and Sanatan Goswami. And their nephew, who was one of the 6 Goswamis, was Jiva Goswami. Jiva Goswami was a very prolific writer. Prolific means he wrote 400,000 verses in Sanskrit, and very, very profound verses. I mean, just like, how long is Mahabharata? 100,000 verses, right? And Bhagavatam is 18,000 verses. And Bhagavad-Gita is how many? 700? 700 verses. So it's like he wrote 3 Mahabharats and, several Bhagavatams and a few Bhagavad-Gitas and some other books. One man. Not so long ago. 450 years ago. So one of his compositions is a 6-part exposition on Srimad-Bhagavatam, and we're reading from one of those 6 on Bhagavat Sandarbha, Who is Bhagavan? How to understand, what are the truths about Bhagavan? We're reading from one section from there. It makes reference to this verse that we just discussed. This is Bhagavad Sandarbha, Anuchhed 81, starts with a reference from Padma Purana, Uttarakhanda. Quote, the spiritual worlds are unlimited in number. They are all Shuddha Sattva, filled with spiritual bliss, eternal without change, and devoid of low passions. They are pure gold, shining like millions of suns, personifying Vedic knowledge, filled with pastimes, and devoid of lust and anger. These places exclusively serve the lotus feet of Narayana and are always blissfully singing verses. They are the essence of the Vedas, embodying the 5 Upanishads. Padma Purana. From that verse, it mentions the word Tripad Vibhuti. Tripad Vibhuti means the spiritual world. Pada Vibhuti means the material world, since it is said, again referencing Padma Purana. So, material, spiritual worlds. Quote, the spiritual realm is spread over 3 parts. One part is this world, that's Tripad and Pada. That makes 4 parts, 4 quarters. The 3-part spiritual world is eternal. The power of one part is temporary. The eternal form of the Supreme Lord is situated in that glorious place. That form of the Lord is without decay, eternal, full of pastimes, eternally young, eternally enjoying, and surrounded by Shri, Bhu, and Ishwari. Padma Purana. According to this idea of Tripad Vibhuti, there is a statement in the 2nd canto that helps. We should understand the 2nd canto verse from this Padma Purana verse, which says, 2.6.18, O Brahmana, he is the Lord of spiritual bliss, fearlessness, beyond material existence, because he surpasses material happiness. The power of the Supreme Lord is unlimited. I'm going to go forward. He's giving a lot of detail. It's Bhagavat Sandarbha, who is Bhagavan and what's the abode of Bhagavan. And so he's giving scriptural references, which it's interesting if you're scholarly, and it's going to be a little time consuming, so I'm going to just fast forward. The reference places that he's going to are Canto 2, Chapter 9. In Canto 2, Chapter 9, that's where the 4 essential verses of the Bhagavatam are found, starting with verse 31 through 34, 30 through 33. So this is verses preceding that. It's describing Vaikuntha. As the Padma Purana, so also the Bhagavatam is describing Vaikuntha, and in Vaikuntha, that's where Bhagavan resides. So it's going to lead up to, through the different Anushades, it's going to lead up to Bhagavan speaks to Brahma. And in short, because I'm not going to go through, it's very carefully done, but taking these verses, there are elements of Vaikuntha that are revealed in those earlier verses of chapter 9, canto 2, that make it clear it's eternal and it's quite distinct from this temporary place. Now, the chronology of this description is before Brahma creates. After this description, Brahma gets his realization of Vishnu, and then he creates. But it's making a very clear distinction between the two, which is the topic of these verses. Don't go for the temporary. You deal with it, but deal with it not just in the mood of becoming a gradual enjoyer of the temporary, because little slips and you're in the soup again, but rather deal with it in a matter of detachment from it. Make offerings to the Supreme by offering those objects through devotional consciousness, that's the answer to Uddhava's question. And then you'll become a realizer of Bhagavan. That's what this little section is about. And we'll continue tomorrow, because we're not done with that text 30. There's one more image. And here we go. Illustrating text 30. One may easily conclude that Krishna is the absolute truth and that he is eternally the supreme controller of everything and everyone. Lord Krishna is the only real shelter. As you know, the image that she chose is the Govardhan Leela, and Krishna is showing his supremacy above Indra for sure, but he's also showing lots of affection for his dear devotees in Vrindavan. And he looks like he's enjoying. And they look like they're enjoying. Nanda Maharaj has got his stick holding up the hill, thinking he's a little boy, just 7 years old. He thinks he's holding the hill. That's okay. I'm holding the hill. So that's the loving nature of Krishna, the shelter, the only real shelter. That's detachment is meant to bring one to the position of attachment to Krishna. Otherwise, detachment is restless, insubstantial. It's a whole. I mean, this is almost the fourth chapter in a row on this same topic. Must be an important topic. How to become exclusively attached to Krishna in Krishna's shelter. That some recognizing what the nature of the temporary is important, and acting accordingly. So let's see if there's some discussion. We hopefully have our microphone problem straightened out. Even having some portable microphone problems. You'd like to speak something? Okay, can you speak into the microphone, because we have some remote people? If you can just lower your mask while you speak, that would be good, so we can hear you better. Everyone wants to speak now because they get to take their mask off.
Hare Krishna Maharaj Ji.
Hare Krishna.
I have one question, like in life we have sometimes happiness and sometimes we have life problems.
Yes, sometimes.
Like sickness or family sickness or loss of job or like that. So how can we keep our mind stable in family problems?
Okay. Classic question. And two things. I mean, there's many things, but keep it real simple. It will pass. And shelter in the eternal. When you have those two, you're able to tolerate because you know it's temporary. Whatever it is, it's temporary. Even you get something or lose something, and you have something. There are just phases of time, and it's just the influence of time. It will pass, as time will keep moving, and something else will happen. So detachment through recognizing the temporary nature of things. Then the key is what to do. Okay, it's temporary, but I got to do something. So the intelligence of what to do comes from where? Supersoul. So if your connection with Supersoul is strong, you'll have a better sense of what to do. Say it the opposite. If you don't have a strong connection with Supersoul, you'll have less likely chance of getting making the right selection of what to do. We have to do, in many cases, we can be patient, but we still have to do something. And whatever that something is, intelligence is required. Where is that going to come from? Especially when you're confused, or you're hurting, or someone is hurting, and that hurting you because someone is hurting, or something like that. You need intelligence. And the source of intelligence is Super Soul. So that's a short answer. How do you? You have to have shelter in the Supreme. And you rely on the Supreme for the intelligence, what to do. And meanwhile, this the first part, be tolerant, be patient, because whatever it is, it's going to go. The happiness is going to go, the unhappiness is going to go, the mix is going to go, it's all going to go. So let me just be tolerant and patient and deal with it in the best way that I can, because I have shelter in Sat. That's spiritual life. It's not, let's say it in a negative sense, it's not that for a spiritual personality, they never experience the things that you just described. They're in the same world that you are and we are. The saintly people, they have the same world of duality. And sometimes. It's the world of duality. So how do they maintain their equilibrium? How do you how do you deal with situations that rock the boat? You have to have some ballast in the boat. That shelter in the Supreme. And it requires a life of cultivation of that connection with the Supreme. And then there's steadiness, even when there's turbulence around you. It doesn't mean the turbulence around you stops, but there's steadiness in the midst of that. And there's intelligence how to best handle it. The best intelligence is when that spiritual connection is intact. And easier said than done, but it's a life of, that's yoga, a life of cultivation of linking with the Supreme. Okay.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
You get to remove your mask so we can hear you better. And the people online. Remember, there's people online.
There is no happiness in performing karma. So I assume that there are people who perform both kind of karmas. Good karmas, and the other side of their life is bad karma.
Yes.
So they still get happiness, or they won't get the happiness.
What's the question? Is it what?
There is no happiness in performing karma, you say. So there are people perform both kind of karmas.
Okay.
Bad karmas and good karmas.
Yeah.
So do they get happiness performing good karmas?
Well, so this is the question I was raising before, which is, what's real happiness? And by definition, the Bhagavatam defines, I'll say it two different ways. The Bhagavatam defines that which is substantial or sat is that which isn't temporary, or that which is asat is that which is temporary. So the happiness of pious activity and the fruits of pious activity is temporary. So it looks like, it may temporarily feel like, but it's not. There's no substance there. You with me? No. Okay. Sat. You know the meaning of sat. Sat means it exists. And asat means it doesn't exist, or it's temporary. Sat and asat. Permanent, eternal. The realm of sat is the realm of that which is eternal, and it exists. It doesn't come into being or go out of being. It's eternal. Like the soul, like, the Brahma Jyoti, like Krishna. It doesn't come into being, go out of being. That sat is eternal. Then there's reflection of sat, and it's not eternal. It's asat. It's asat. It's not eternal. So now the point I just made is, in the realm of asat, or the temporary, it may look like something. Here's a mirror, here's an apple, and in the mirror there's a reflection of an apple. Is there an apple in the mirror or no? No. But turn the mirror a little bit and the apple's gone. The reflection, it's just a reflection. There's no substance. That's asat. So the happiness that comes from pious activity, pious karmas, is asat. No, that's the whole point that's being made. There's something, you experience something. We all have experienced, when we go out of our way to do something that's an act of kindness for someone else, we feel something. We feel a happiness. It's a mode of goodness, happiness. Are you telling me that's not what real happiness is? The statement is, it's temporary. It appears to be the real thing, but it's not the real thing. There is the apple exists, and the reflection of the apple looks like the apple. It looks just like the apple. Then you get a distorted mirror, and it looks like a big apple, or a skinny apple, or a fat apple, or a tall apple, or a small, depending on the contour of the mirror. But in whatever the configuration in the mirror is, there's no substance there. You can't get nourishment from that reflection. There is nourishment from the real thing. So real happiness is in the realm of sat. That's what the statement is. Good karmas, bad karmas, it's asat. Of a temporary nature that looks like the real thing, but it's not the real thing. You with me? Okay. So let's say the same thing in another way. It's the same thing. Chapter 15, Bhagavad-Gita. You familiar? Yes. The upside down tree. There's no such thing as a tree where the roots grow up and the branches grow down, except a reflection in the water. So here's a tree, there's a body of water, and in the body of water, there's a tree where the roots grow up and the branches go down, but it's just a reflection of the tree. It's insubstantial. It's asat. But it looks like, supposing I see an apple in that tree, in that reflection, reach to get the apple and you just get a handful of water because there's no substance. It looks like this world is a reflection of the spiritual world. It's asat. The happiness of piety is insubstantial. It's asat. That's not real happiness. So chase after that which is not real happiness, and you don't get real happiness. You get something. That's the idea. An asat, the ultimate goal is to reach that which is eternal, sat. And the basis and support of sat is Krishna. Yeah, so the last verse of chapter 14 Bhagavad-Gita. You like Bhagavad-Gita, right? Yes. Okay. Last verse of chapter 14 Bhagavad-Gita. Brahmano hi pratishta aham. Pratishta is a nice Sanskrit word. It means the basis and support. Like when you do a deity installation, it's called pran pratishta, right? Pratishta. The pran pratishta is just installing the deity. Pratishta is the basis and support of something. So Krishna is the basis and support of Brahman or Sat. This Bhagavan is the basis and support of Sat. Sat, feature, is an incomplete realization of that which is eternal, because that which is eternal is Bhagavan. And the Brahman effulgence emanates from Bhagavan. He's the basis. As the light of the sun is the sun itself is the basis and support from the light of the sun. If I'm in the sunshine, I'm not in the sun planet. But if you're in the sun planet, it's plenty hot and bright. So if you reach Bhagavan, you're in the realm of Sat. Even you can be moving around in the asat place, the shadow reflection place. And if you maintain consciousness of Bhagavan while you're moving around in the temporary, like, your question, when you're moving around in the temporary, and sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that because it's a place of duality. Sometimes things are just fine. Sometimes things are just awful. And sometimes it gets worse. And sometimes it gets kind of quiet. And sometimes it's the world of duality. So one can move through this world of duality if there's shelter in Bhagavan, and that's your stability. That's yoga, connecting with the Supreme. That's the meaning of yoga. So, yes, what you said in a nutshell, just become Krishna conscious. What does that mean? Make your connection with Bhagavan like real, palpable. It's not conditional. It's not in the mind. It's for real. And when it's for real, then the temporary can do its thing and you're okay. I mean, you have to deal with the temporary. There's this heat wave coming through. You deal with it.
Go through all this life cycle.
Yeah.
So Golok is the ultimate.
Yes. Well, it can happen in this lifetime. If you make that Bhagavan connection, that's where you go. In this one lifetime. Not just you have to wait and cross your fingers and hope you go to the good place. You can be conscious of Bhagavan, lickety-split. There's no material disqualification or material qualification. It's a spiritual experience or a spiritual exercise. And the obstacle is our attachment to the temporary, trying to be the enjoyers of the temporary, the good and the bad, and the mix. And in our comfort zone, like, I'm okay. Or I just got to be pious so I can get more enjoyment temporary enjoyment instead of the temporary suffering. Some people, that's their program. And it's still temporary. And it's not what real happiness is. It's not sat yet. Okay? Anyone else?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Maharaj, if I heard correctly, you told that there are innumerable spiritual worlds.
Spiritual planets.
Okay, so you mean those are Vaikuntha planets?
Vaikuntha planets, exactly.
Okay, because spiritual world is just one.
Yeah,
Goloka.
that's correct.
And from
It's the translation says worlds, but my reading, as I was reading it, I thought the same thing you're thinking. It means planets, because those are worlds or planets.
And if somebody reaches to Vaikuntha, is there scope to reach Goloka from there?
It's possible, but it's not common.
Okay.
That is to say, if one reaches Vaikuntha, you're very contented. So why go somewhere when you're very contented? And it's also rasa connected. If one's mood towards the source of everything, towards Bhagavan, is a mood of awe and veneration, that's a Vaikuntha destination. And Goloka isn't awe and veneration, it's something else. It's intimacy of loving service. So how we cultivate our connection or attachment to Bhagavan is important. It's going to determine our destination.
Thank you.
Online. Yes?
There is one question.
One, okay.
Online, and I have one question, madam. Just a quick.
Go online.
This is from Alisa Ishrani. Many sinful activities we have performed in previous lives. The cloud of that sins reminds us.
The cloud of what?
That sins. That sins.
The sins.
Sins. Reminds as we try and progress the cloud does not fade like stink in alcohol bottle linkers, what activities should we do?
I couldn't follow. Are you, is the button on? Is the volume on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Try
Can
again.
repeat. Okay.
There's sins that cloud. And then what's?
So the question is, as we try and progress, the cloud of sin does not fade like stink in alcohol bottle linkers.
What?
That's what it's written.
Could you say it in a language that I can understand? What is her question? Paraphrase her question.
Okay. So she's kind of want to know lot of sinful activities that we did in our previous lives, right? So how can we
Overcome them?
overcome and progress that cloud of all
Okay.
the things?
Okay. I had an exchange with a devotee in China on this topic just yesterday. Like a little quick exchange. The nature of the power of bhakti, the nature of bhakti and the power of bhakti is that it can at once extinguish unlimited sinful reactions, more than you can perform. Bhakti has that power. So the cloud, back to her question, the cloud of sinful activities can be at once dissipated by bhakti, and specifically even calling of the names of the Lord, even if it's unintentional, like a Jamula's calling for his son. He happened to name his son, Super Soul gave him that inspiration to name his son Narayana. So he called for his son, thinking, son, save me, here come the Avadutas. So that chanting, unintentionally calling the Lord's name, has the power to remove all sins. And it's not just at the time of death. The fact of the matter is he was regularly calling his son's name. Dear Narayan, come here, it's time for lunch. Dear Narayan, please bring my shoes. Dear Narayan, Narayan, Narayan. That unintentional calling of the Lord's name has, so back to her question, has the potency to nullify sins, all sins, even the unintentional kind. So that's the answer to her question. Now, there's another obstacle besides the reactions of sins. What's that? And that's the reactions of offenses. And the byproduct of offenses is anartha in Sanskrit. It's not different than papa. It's anartha. Anartha means unwanted things in the heart, and they're more difficult to overcome. So it's by continuous bhakti that they can be overcome. And they carry over from lifetimes too. I'm over answering the question, because her question was how to overcome the cloud of sin, and it's just by bhakti has the power. So bhakti isn't just like, ring a bell and wave a stick of incense and that's bhakti. It's not a behavior. It's bhakti. It's wanting to please. So, you have your question now.
Yeah. Just a quick question, Maharaj. We talked about the fear, right?
Fear.
Yeah. So, and also the good and bad fear. So, my question is, so it is okay to have good fear?
Well, yeah. I mean, it depends on what you understand good fear to be. But yeah, sure.
Okay.
It's good to be fearless too.
So,
Prahlad Maharaj says, for example, my fear is unwholesome association. Because through unwholesome association, my remembrance of you can be blocked. So I don't want unwholesome association. Now, that's a little challenging because in this world there's lots of unwholesome association. But that's something to be wary of. Anything further?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I have a question about the attachment with the sensual objects, like food, so I mean, I'm doing devotion, but sometimes I feel that the attachment for the food same is as like I was 16. Still, even though I'm doing a lot of bhakti and all kind of things, the same attachment. So there is nothing changed. So sometimes I'm thinking that why? I mean, nothing change happened. Just same, see the food is
I'm not clear on what your question is. Are you speaking about attachment to the fruits?
food.
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 Food. Oh, I thought you said fruits.
No, food.
Food. Okay. You have attachment for food.
Yeah.
So you want to know how to get beyond attachment to food. That's your
Same
question?
thing, yeah. Even though doing this bhakti, I couldn't see any changes that, I don't want much, kind of some kind of detachment, 60% eat, I am fine. But still, I always
more.
More.
You want to know why, or you want to know what to do?
Yeah, what to do?
What to do. Okay. Be patient. And turn the bhakti dial up. By that I mean, well, I'll use a little example. I like this example. The goal, supposing the goal is to prepare some rice, and A or B, you make the flame, put the rice in the pot, a little bit of salt in the water, put it on the flame. That's A. B, you put the flame about 6 feet above the flame. Which is going to cook faster? Right next to the flame, right? So maybe your bhakti is a little distant from the activities of bhakti, are a little bit distant from the flame. What's the flame? What do you mean, this flame? What's that? It's specifically, it's the desire to please Krishna. That's what bhakti is. Anukulyena Krishna Anushilanam. That's what the flame is. What's that? Let my act of eating, and supposing I'm struggling with the act of eating, so then you take other things that you do and dedicate those other things for the pleasure of Krishna. That's Rishikena, Rishikesha, Sevanam. You know Rishikesh, the master of Rishikesha, master of the senses. Let the senses be used for the pleasure in service to the master of the senses. So take some other areas of your life and do those for the pleasure of Krishna. And then you apply that for the pleasure of Krishna principle, the bhakti principle, to your eating. Do that for the pleasure of Krishna. You do your physical therapy. You know physical therapy, right? 30 of those and 20 of those so many times a day. When you have a good therapist, things get normalized again. Like with physical therapy, you do some bhakti therapy, some practice, some consciousness investment in, let me do this for Krishna, whatever that is. Brush your teeth for Krishna, drive your car for Krishna. Yad karoshi, yad asnasi, yad jahosi dadasi yad. Your friend likes Bhagavad-Gita, he'll tell you that verse. You do whatever you do for Krishna. So and then you apply that for Krishna principle to your eating. And that's bringing the pot closer to the flame. And the rice is going to cook faster. Instead of, so many years. It may eventually cook. It'll take, because you got the flame, got the rice and the water in the pot. It can take a while. So be patient, but then bring the pot closer to the flame. Do that which is meant for the pleasure of Krishna in the consciousness of for the pleasure of Krishna. The bhakti principle gets stronger and the elevation of consciousness will happen more quickly. But gradually. Maybe too gradually. But that's how bhakti grows. And you're asking the question as part of the bhakti growing. Because otherwise you could just go on doing a mechanical way and bhakti doesn't grow as it could, as you want. So the inquisitive spirit helps bhakti to grow. And, going back to the question earlier, the intelligence from Krishna will be supplied. If you want to, Krishna will give the intelligence to. Come to him. Okay? Hare Krishna. I think we're done.